Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description below where you will find links to all of my social media shenanigans, including where to find my patterns so you can knit them up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, and how to support me on Patreon. Today, I am going to answer the first question from my new Ask Barbara Anything Knitting type question thing that I announced last week on my vlog. What this is, and there will be a link in the description below to where you can find a place to submit a question to me. It is through MailChimp, so I don't have to worry about managing things. It'll put it all in one spot, and it's just a simple survey. You click on the link, it'll pop up and it says, what question do you want to ask Barbara? And if you've got a knitting type or design type or just in general yarny type, you know, not too intrusive, maybe personal question, you can feel free to ask it. And I'm going to use these questions as a basis to steer the direction of what kind of videos I want to make for y'all. And this one was a very straightforward question, and I was like, I can answer that. And it helped that in my class on Tuesday night, I even had a student who asked the same question, and I'm like, this is something obviously that I need to make a video for. So this question is from Mike K, and they asked, what are the different ways to do an M1 and how can you tell when to use it? An M1 being make one. So I want to jump right because the title of this video is going to be how to do make ones, make one right, make one left. I'm going to jump directly to the instructional video and then come back after. Make sure you hang around after the instructional part and we will talk more about the appropriate time and place to use these different techniques. Make one. If the instructions just say make one, this is pretty much what it means. Now, for all of these stitches, what we're going to be talking about is the bar between your stitches. And what you have to look at is the stitch you just finished right here. And you can see that you just knit into this stitch. This is the one below. And you're going to knit into this stitch is the next stitch on your needle. But there's this little bar that runs from here across and then up into here. It's this bar right here. When they're talking about grabbing the bar between the stitches, that's the bar they're talking about right there. Simple make one is you insert your needle underneath that bar between your columns of stitches, grab your working yarn just like you're making a stitch and pulling it through. You have just made a stitch appear between two existing columns of stitches. That is a make one. Okay, now make one right and make one left are different because you twist the stitch. And here is a make one I've already done. When you do a make one, as you can see, you get a hole in your knitting. You can see it. It is not an invisible increase. There's a hole. Make one right and make one left are an attempt to make that hole go away. And the way that that is accomplished is by twisting the stitch. Now, when you're thinking about make one right versus make one left, there are two elements you need to think about. What direction you're picking up the bar from and what leg you're knitting into, okay? For make one right, you want to use your left-hand needle and pick it up from behind. The way I remember that, for some unknown reason in my brain, R, right, goes with B, back, like R&B music. So if you're doing right, you pick it up from the back. Now you can see that can be a little awkward. So you can pick it up with your right hand needle and stick it on your left hand needle. But what you have to know and what has to happen is the left hand needle needs to be coming from the back to the front. Now, to twist that stitch, you have to knit through the opposite of the way you picked it up. So since this is right and we picked it up from the back, we have to knit through the front leg, which can be awkward, right? Trying to get that in there, which is where my particular trick or tip or whatever you want to call it, I have a hard time getting that stitch. So what I do is I actually insert my right hand needle purlwise, pull that stitch away from my left hand needle, trap it with my thumb so it stays out, and then I can easily knit through that front loop and pull through my make one right. And the reason why it's right is you can see as it's twisted, this bar is running from left to the right, so it's leaning to the right. I'm going to knit a couple stitches. Make one left is the opposite. Get that out of the way. Make one left is the opposite of make one right. So since you know R, right, you pick it up from the back. Make one left, you pick up from the front. And left, L-E-F-T, has a F in it. Front. Okay? So you take your left hand needle and pick it up from the front. You see how I did that? Instead of picking it up from the back, you pick it up from the front. And your new stitch that you're going to make, the bar is mounted normal way. But since you picked it up from the front, you need to knit it through the back. And again, this can get awkward and fiddly. So the way I do it is I actually, again, insert it like I'm going to do it purlwise, and then go up and over and catch that. And now I've rotated so I can knit through the back loop. And you can see, let me show you. Let me put this back over here so you can see it easily. That bar is now running from the right to the left. It's leaning left, which makes it a left make one left. I'm gonna finish out this row real quick. I have these below so you can really see them. Go scooch down onto my cable. So this is what I just made. That's what a make one looks like. It leaves a hole. Now, this hole is not as big as a yarn over would be. Because you're lifting it, you're going to see how on either side, the stitch on either side gets a little smaller because we're putting additional tension. I have these markers here so I can mark the make one right, make one left are nearly invisible. So you can see this is the make one right. And you can tell it's a make one right because you see the way that you twisted the stitch, it makes it lean to the right. Then we've got to make one left, which I marked because, as I said, nearly invisible. My marker's not cooperating. Where is it? Whoop, right there. You see how this stitch, that is the bar, we lifted up and you can see how it twisted. Pull that apart so you can really see it. You see how you've got this little hole, but that twisted, and that twist adds more tension and it closes up this big old hole that a make one will leave. I made a little swatch so that I could show y'all how this works in practice in a garment and what they look like. Now, it is very common for M1s, make one lefts and make one rights, to be found on either side of a stitch where the instructions read knit to marker, make one right, slip marker, knit one, make one left. Or there'll be, especially in some of the prettier raglans, there will be a few stitches in between a column that you're increasing on either side. You see that in raglans, on garments. You also see it frequently on thumb gussets, only for that the instruction would more commonly be that you place 2 markers and you knit to the marker, slip marker, make 1, knit 1, make 1, slip marker, so that it's growing inside and you're fanning it out. It's just different ways it's done, but I wanted you to see what they look like when they're paired with each other. So this column here is make 1 right, knit 1, make 1 left, and you can see you've got these little, you can see where the leaning is, the little twists are right behind there where it's this one's a right because it's twisted to the right, and that makes the stitch flare out slightly to the right. And then this, you can see that they're going slightly to the left. It makes the stitch flare out to the left, and you get this beautiful growing slightly biased fabric on either side of your central column. This is what happens when they're actually leaning inwards towards your central column. This is make 1 left, knit 1, make 1 right. And you can see that it creates, because they're not flaring out, they're kind of leaning in. It just looks, it's a real subtle difference. But you can see that the growing columns that you've made are kind of straighter. They don't curve in the same way. These flare out very strongly. These are a little bit more upright. It still flares out, but it's just slightly different. It's super subtle, but you can see because they're leaning in, there's a little bit more of a gap on either side of the column. Let me see if I can really show that to you. See how you've got these little gaps? This one has it too, but they're just a little more subtle. So I wanted you to see the difference between having your directional make ones being make 1 right, center column, make 1 left, or having them leaning away from each other or having them leaning towards each other. It just has a slightly different look, and it's kind of fun to play with. We'll go back. I want to show you one more time. We will go back to the knitting, and I'm going to show you, I'm not going to show you make 1 again, because honestly, you are very rarely going to run into a situation where you're simply making 1. The directional ones are much more common. So let me try this with the yarn in my right hand. We all know this is not my best look, but I want to show it to y'all. Make sure I don't pop that off. So make 1 right. Remember, right, you lift it from the back. So you insert your left-hand needle from back to front underneath that bar, and then we have to knit through the front loop. But it's hard to get that because of the way it's twisted. So I insert this way, pull it away. So you've got that big loop. You can see it. Trap it with my finger, and then it's way easy to knit through that front loop and twist the bar. Okay, so I'm gonna knit that, knit that. Now, make 1 left. Left is the opposite of right. Left has an F in it, so you lift it from the front. You insert your left-hand needle under the bar from front to back, and now we want to knit through that back loop because we lifted from the front. Again, it's kind of tough to get that needle back there, so the way I do it is I put it purlwise through the front. Oopsie, I missed it. See, this is harder this way. This might not be a benefit if you're holding your yarn in your right hand. you got to make sure that you then catch that. Nope, it doesn't work. See, this is why I'm experimenting. It doesn't really work when I'm holding my yarn in the right hand. So what you got to do is get that yarn pulled away. You got to get your needle, get in focus, through that back loop right there. Knit it through the back loop. And there we did. See, I am so bad at tensioning yarn in my right hand. But it is possible, and we learned something. So my trick for making that easier works with continental, but not so much with English style. So I'm going to show you it in continental, just so you can see that trick. You lift from the front, but we want to knit through the back. But I insert like this, and then my thumb, you see how that prevented that from popping off? Pull it through. Boop. Again, you see you've made one left. Okay. So that is make one right, make one left. Now, I hope that you have a better idea of how to make one right, and make one left, and you understand what they look like. Now, the second part of Mike's question was, how can you tell when to use it? Well, the number one way to tell when to use it is when the pattern tells you to. So, like, I am very, very picky about the increases I use. So in my patterns, I'm going to tell you what to use and when to use it. Increases, decreases, all of those things. But occasionally you will run into patterns that just say make one. I don't know why, but you do. So as you saw, a simple make one leaves a hole. So if you might want to use that if you want a decorative hole in your work that's not as quite as big of a hole as a yarn over, because you're lifting that stitch, you're lifting that bar, it's not going to be as big over as actually making a yarn over, but it is going to be a good size hole. So I can see if you like the hole, like it could be pretty decoratively on a raglan or defining the center of a shawl. You could definitely do a make one. And then with make one left and make one right, it's about directionality. It's about, do you want the stitches to lean one way or the other? I showed you in the little swatch I had how they looked on framing either side of a column, and it does have a distinctly different look. So which one you would use would entirely depend on which look you want. Now, if we are talking about a pattern that tells you something like evenly increase 6 stitches around the circumference, and there are patterns that will do that, pretty much use make one left, make one right, whichever one is easiest for you to execute, because the goal here is for the stitch to be, or the increase to be, as invisible as possible. And since rarely do these stack on top of each other, they're not going to be as visible, and you're just using them because that kind of instruction is usually happening when you're increasing in a pattern, like for a garment, and they'll be spaced out, but it's like you do it on one round or row, and then you knit a couple more inches, and then you do it again because you're making a more gradual increase. So if you need to do that, it's just be consistent. If you prefer make one left, use make one left. If it's easier for you to execute, if it looks neater, if for some reason it's a better stitch for you. If you prefer make one right, use make one right. Again, it's because it's supposed to be invisible that it doesn't really matter. But the number one thing is how to know which one is how you want it to visually appear and what is your pattern telling you to do. Now, one thing I want to make a little bit clear is that make ones and yarn overs functionally are pretty interchangeable. As long as you know that if the instruction called for a make one and you use a yarn over, it's going to put a hole in your work. If you're fine with the visual appearance of the hole, or if you even like the visual appearance of the hole, you can substitute make ones for yarn overs fairly easily without disrupting the flow of your pattern. It will just change the visual appearance. Not so for knit front back. Knit front back as an increase consumes a stitch. It uses a stitch in your work. So if you substitute knit front back for make one, you need to make sure you understand that you've used a stitch that designer is not compensating for in their instructions. So if your instructions said knit 8, make one, knit 8, and you knit 8, knit front back, then you would need to knit 7 because you've used up a stitch. The same if you're swapping it out the other direction. If the instruction calls for a knit front back, if it was knit 8, knit front back, knit 8, and you substitute a make one, you'd end up with knit 8, make one, knit 9, because you're not consuming that stitch. So make ones and yarn overs, you can substitute as long as you understand it's going to change the visual appearance. Substituting in a knit front back or another stitch that actually consumes a stitch, you need to be very, very careful and make sure you know what you're doing before you do that, because it can throw your pattern off significantly. So I wanted to add in that little tidbit, that little piece of advice. I'm not saying you can't do it. I just am saying that you need to understand what you're doing and compensate for that. It's a significant change. Substituting in yarn over, because they both occur between the columns of stitches, it's not going to significantly affect anything except the visual appearance of what you've done. It's going to make it more open. It's going to leave a hole. Is really it. So, okay. I hope, Mark, that I have answered your question of the different ways to make one, and those are just the 3 most basic. There are probably other make ones out there. I know there are ways to make it in the stitch below. There are all kinds of ways to increase, and every time you think you've learned them all, someone invents a new one. But in general, when you see the instruction make one, it was the first one I showed, just going under the bar, make one right, make one left, is this similar involving the bar, but you're twisting the stitch to close up the hole. Thank you so much for the question. It was a great prompt to get this video out there, and hopefully it is helpful. If you like this video, if it was helpful to you, please let me know in the comments below. If you have a different make one or increase technique that you prefer, I'd love to hear about it. I love learning new things, and that's actually kind of funny. So I've made a spreadsheet for all of the questions I'm receiving through the survey, and the tabs, I've made tabs, so I'm sorting them. And right now I've got design questions, and I'm probably going to do a whole video answering y'all's questions about my design process. I have tutorial questions, which this was the first one on the list. I have garment questions. And the thing is I don't make garments. So I'm going to have to find a garment expert to maybe interview and ask your questions of, because I don't know how to do some of these. And then I have a tab that's techniques I can't do. It's y'all asking me about stuff that I don't know how to do it. So either I'm going to have to figure out how to do it, learn it myself, or find an expert to help both of us, all of us, learn at the same time. So if you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.